Hey guys, tonight we're slipping deep into a cave where firelight dances on stone walls and ancient shadows flicker with secrets. You're crouching low, breath catching in the cold, damp air, one hand brushing a limestone ledge. Around you, walls ripple with drawings huge bulls, stick figure hunters, strange patterns that make your modern brain itch with curiosity. Is it just art or is it something more? You probably won't survive this. By the way, if you were actually here 10,000 years ago, you'd already be hypothermic and possibly eaten by a cave lion. Just saying. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it in your corner of the world? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You crouch lower, one bare foot nudging a smooth stone. There's no flashlight, just your flickering torch and its sizzling whisper against the cave's damp breath. Walls seem to come alive in the fire's pulse. A huge bull lurches from the rock, legs mid-stride. There's motion here, or the illusion of it. But then your eyes snag on something odd. Just to the left of a painted bison's eye, a small circle, almost like a deliberate dot. Too perfect, too intentional. You lean closer, forehead nearly brushing the cold rock. The dot isn't animal. It isn't symbolic in the usual sense. And suddenly, a strange thought slips through your head like smoke. What if it's the sun? Welcome to Lascaux, or maybe Chauvet, or Altamira. Pick your cave, each one hums with stories nobody can quite agree on. But tonight, you're here to follow a theory that some people scoff at and others whisper about, that one of these mysterious artworks predicted a solar eclipse. Yep, 10,000 years ago. Someone in a fur tunic might have watched the sun vanish and tried to explain it the only way they knew how. With paint, with fire, with stone. You shuffle along the wall, deeper into the chamber. Your torch sends shadows climbing up the vaulted ceiling. You think you see a horse's flank, or maybe a lion's snarl, but what's more interesting now are the non-animal things. Lines, dots, spirals. One looks like Orion's belt. Another, a crude crescent. Could it be a moon? Historians still argue whether these dots and symbols are star maps or just decorative patterns. There's no user manual, no signature at the bottom that says, painted by Throg, astronomer-in-chief, 10,000 BC. But you're starting to wonder, could they have seen the sky as a kind of clock, or maybe a story? Here's a wild thing: some of these caves align eerily well with the solstices. In Newgrange, Ireland, not a cave, but close enough sunlight pierces the darkness only on the winter solstice, illuminating carvings deep within. Coincidence? Sure, or maybe not. In the torchlight, your breath curls like fog. You're wrapped in a deerskin robe that still smells faintly of smoke and wet fur. Your stomach growls. You haven't eaten since the mammoth bone broth this morning. Your tribe is small, maybe 20 souls. You all rely on the rhythms of the world, when the salmon return, when the reindeer migrate, when the sun dips too low for comfort. Missing one of those beats could mean starvation. And then what if the sun disappears? What if one morning it rises like normal and then vanishes behind a black circle, casting the world into eerie twilight. You'd panic, obviously. You'd look to the elders, the shamans, the painters. Maybe they'd already seen the signs. Maybe they knew, and maybe, just maybe, they marked it on a wall. That's what one archaeologist thought when he stared at a panel in Lascaux known as the shaft scene. It's weird. A man appears to be falling or maybe dead. There's a bird, a bison, and yes, again a dot. Some call this the first recorded story. Others say it's just a hunting scene gone abstract. But a handful of fringe researchers think the positioning lines up with known celestial events. One theory, it's a record of an eclipse. Not just art, but astronomy. Still, mainstream historians push back. You're projecting. They say that dot could be anything, could be nothing. After all, we're 10 millennia too late to ask the artist. But let's not pretend ancient people were clueless. They built monuments, followed stars, tracked migrations across generations. They noticed things. You inch farther into the cave, fingers grazing mineral-coated rock. You imagine yourself as one of them, a teenager maybe, squatting with a handful of crushed ochre. You aren't doodling. You're recording. Because last summer, the sky went dark. Birds stopped singing. The air felt wrong, and everyone stared up, terrified. As the moon devoured the sun, you didn't have science to explain it, but you had stories, you had paint, and so you left a mark, and that mark, maybe you're staring at it right now, a single dot in a place that doesn't make sense unless you're thinking about the sky. Later, researchers will scan this wall with laser tech. They'll model light angles. One will gasp and say the dot aligns with a solar eclipse from exactly 10,572 years ago. Others will say it's a coincidence, but the idea sticks. Tonight, the cave seems to breathe with your thoughts. Outside, snow falls silently. Inside, you're warm from the torch, heart racing, because now the dot isn't just a dot. It's a breadcrumb, a trail, a clue that people who lived in fur and hunted with spears were watching the cosmos just like you do now, with awe, confusion, and the need to understand. But that dot, that tiny mark, it's not alone. The torch crackles in your hand, dripping resin and smoke into the thick air. The flame licks at shadows as you inch forward, deeper into the cave's belly. Your eyes scan the stone like it's a riddle waiting to be solved. There, another panel, and on it a bull. But not just any bull. This one is different. Its eye is a swirl, exaggerated. There's a dark circle near it, too perfectly round to ignore. And around that dots, not random speckles, but arranged deliberately. You take a slow step back, trying to take it all in. It's like a map, or maybe a message. But here's the twist. It might not be an animal at all. It might be the sky. The Paleolithic artist's brush, made from moss or split bone, wasn't just illustrating the hunt. According to a fringe, but increasingly compelling theory, they were tracking the heavens. Some researchers believe these bulls represent constellations, and that the dots stars, or planets, or even eclipses. Specifically, there's one panel in Lascaux that gets a lot of buzz. A bull, likely a prehistoric representation of Taurus, with a cluster of dots hovering above its back. It looks suspiciously like the Pleiades, that tiny bunch of stars you can still see on cold winter nights, clustered like glowing breadcrumbs across the black velvet sky. You probably haven't stared at the Pleiades long enough to really feel their impact. But back then, they were a big deal, a seasonal marker. Their appearance in the sky meant reindeer would soon return. Salmon would start swimming upstream. Life would begin again. And guess what's right? Near the Pleiades in the night sky. Yep, the sun's path, also known as the ecliptic, the very track along which eclipses happen. You glance again at the bull painting. Now it's not charging, it's orbiting, and those dots above it. Not a decorative afterthought. They might be astronomy. Mainstream scholars are cautious here. Don't get carried away. They say you're projecting modern science onto ancient minds. Fair enough, but you can't unsee it once you've seen it. You can't help but wonder if those cave painters weren't just artists. They were proto-astronomers, sketching their sky before we had words for it. There's also a weird, almost poetic fringe theory you stumble across in a dusty journal. Someone once suggested that the bulls of Lascaux mirror the position of stars during a total solar eclipse visible from that region roughly 10,000 years ago. It sounds outlandish. It sounds cinematic. And maybe that's the point. Historians still argue whether those dots actually represent celestial bodies or if we're reading too much into pigment and rock. But the idea lingers. You reach out and touch the rock gently, respectfully. It's cool and rough. The texture hasn't changed in millennia. Imagine a young hunter kneels here, pigment on his fingers, looking up at the dawn sky after something terrifying, a day when the sun went dark. Not cloudy, not stormy, gone, swallowed, as if by a beast. He doesn't have Newton's physics. He has myths. He has memory. And now he has a wall, and he starts to draw. Picture it. A fire flickers beside him. The walls around him come alive with horned creatures and streaks of ochre. He isn't just painting what he sees. He's painting what he knows, or maybe what he fears. A solar eclipse isn't subtle. Daylight dims, birds quiet, shadows sharpen unnaturally. In totality, the sun becomes a black hole, rimmed in flame. Even today, it rattles us, but for Paleolithic people, it would have been an act of gods or monsters. One dot becomes a marker for that day. Another marks the moon's position, and perhaps, just maybe, he draws the bull to represent the star pattern where it happened. You don't need modern math to notice cycles, just time and trust in what you've seen. Still, the skeptics have a point. We can't ask him. We can't be sure. But you press deeper into the cave, following the dots, like a breadcrumb trail. They skip along the walls, some in pairs, some solo. One seems to echo the curve of the moon. Another feels like a solar corona, dancing in negative space. You start noticing these marks everywhere now. In France, in Spain, even in caves in Indonesia. Dots, spirals, animal shapes that match the constellations eerily well. Is this a coincidence? Maybe, but it's a patterned coincidence. Fringe archaeologists often get side-eyed for pushing theories like this, but occasionally they're right. Remember how Heinrich Schliemann believed the Iliad was true and went hunting for Troy? People laughed until he found it. Could this be the same kind of moment? Somewhere outside this cave, the sky turns. You imagine the stars wheeling above in slow, ancient choreography. Back then, the sky was TV, calendar, clock, and prophecy all rolled into one. Miss the signs, and your tribe might not survive the winter. But what if you didn't miss the signs? What if, one day, you noticed the moon was creeping into position again, just like last time? What if you knew, somehow, that the sun would vanish at midday? You'd want to warn someone, or mark the moment, or maybe just try to make sense of it by etching it into stone. And so, the bull gets a dot, the sky gets a map, and the cave becomes more than a shelter. It becomes memory, and warning, and wonder. You squint one last time at the painting, heart ticking like a drum in the silence. The dots aren't animals, they're stars, they're symbols, they're stories, encoded in flickering flame. But here's the eerie part. Some dots aren't where they should be. You blink, and for a second, you swear one of the dots moved. Of course, it didn't, but that's the thing with caves and flickering light. Your brain fills in blanks. It didn't even know it had. You press a hand against the cold wall, trying to anchor yourself. Your breath is louder now, echoing slightly in the stone hush. Let's rewind the clock. Not a few decades, not a few centuries, but 10,000 years. You step out of the cave and into a world barely recognizable. It's cold, bitterly cold. Glaciers still claw at the edges of Europe, growling down mountains like slow, frozen beasts. The last ice age is ending, but just barely. You pull your mammoth hide hood tighter, eyes scanning the landscape. White tundras stretch to the horizon, dotted with pine and birch. Herds of reindeer graze in the distance. The sky is endless, and yes, it's beautiful, but it's also brutal. You're living in the Magdalenian era, part of a group of nomadic hunter-gatherers. There are no farms, no villages, just your tribe, your tools, and your instincts. You move with the animals, with the seasons, with the sun, and knowing exactly where the sun is supposed to be, that could mean the difference between feasting and famine. So when one of the elders notices that the Pleiades always rise just before the reindeer return, he doesn't write it down. He remembers, and he passes it on. Eventually, someone paints it on a wall. That's the emotional core here. This wasn't some science project. It was survival. If you missed a migration, if you mistimed a season, you didn't reschedule, you died. Which means those stars up there, they weren't just pretty, they were a lifeline. You crouch in the snow beside your group, warming your hands over a seal-fat lamp. The elder beside you mumbles about a strange thing he once saw the sky going black in the middle of the day. You don't understand. How can that happen? He doesn't know either, but he saw it, and he's afraid. The tribe's shaman listens closely. She's marked the sun's path on a piece of bone, scratched with careful notches. She's been tracking the moon too, its shape, its rise and fall, and slowly, a pattern emerges. Here's a historical nugget for you bone calendars. Some carved over 20,000 years ago suggest that Paleolithic people tracked lunar cycles with stunning accuracy. One carved baton found in France even lines up with the lunar month within a day or two. And that's without telescopes, spreadsheets, or Google. You walk with your tribe for days across frozen valleys, through forests where wolves prowl. At night, you huddle by the fire, staring up. The stars don't twinkle, they glow, harsh and brilliant. No light pollution, no distractions, just you, your breath, and a sky so clear It feels like it might swallow you whole. You begin to know the stars by heart. That hook-shaped one is always low in summer. That trio of dots climbs higher as the nights grow longer. One of them vanishes when the snow melts. These aren't constellations, yet not officially. But to you they're stories, markers, friends. One night, a hunter beside you gasps. The moon's wrong, he says. You look up. He's right. It's new, dark, but something's off, and then it begins. A sliver of the sun disappears right there. In the middle of the afternoon, birds scream, dogs whine, the wind dies. The world turns a strange, bruised color. Shadows twist. People drop to their knees, crying out in fear or prayer. Totality. The first solar eclipse you've ever seen, and it feels like the end of the world. You survive. Of course, the sun returns, but it haunts you, and it sticks with the shaman too. She draws what she saw into the dirt, trying to explain. Maybe she guesses the moon had something to do with it. Maybe she's just trying to remember, but she marks it later. Back in the cave, someone takes pigment and charcoal and puts it on the wall. A bull, dots, a strange spiral. They don't sign it. They don't even explain it. But they leave it there for you to find 10,000 years later. Here's where things get spooky. Some archaeologists now believe that repeating geometric shapes in cave art correspond to specific natural events. One researcher mapped a set of symbols across multiple sites, dots, lines, curves, and discovered that they might represent a proto-writing system. Not full-on language yet, but the seeds of it, maybe even the earliest attempt to record time. Of course, not everyone agrees. Pattern recognition is in our nature. Say skeptics, you're just seeing what you want to see. And maybe they're right, but maybe not. Historians still argue whether this cave art is just decoration or something deeper. Were the dots religious mathematical? Did the artists even mean anything at all? You imagine the painter's hand again calloused, careful dabbing paint with a chewed reed or a fingertip. Was she trying to warn someone or just remember? Maybe she didn't know what she was drawing. Maybe she just felt it mattered. That's the discomforting truth. The closer we get to these people, the more they look like us, and that makes them harder to dismiss. You step back from the wall, heart pounding, out in the snow-covered plains. The sky is clear again. You lie on your back, staring up. The Pleiades sparkle like a question you'll never fully answer. The moon is a thin smile. The sun will rise tomorrow, probably. But now you know what they knew, that even the sky can betray you. That sometimes day turns to night, and that the only thing you can do, maybe, is leave a mark and hope someone finds it. Someone like you, the next morning. You wake up sore from the cold stone floor of the cave. Your limbs ache in places you didn't know could ache. And yet, your mind is alive, buzzing with the image of those dots. You climb to your feet slowly, torchlight flickering off the ancient walls, and for a brief second, you feel like you're being watched, not by a predator or another person, by the past. And here's where things take a turn. You're about to leave this cave system and head to another one, because Lascaux is just one site. A superstar, sure, but there are others, some even older, and one of them holds a clue that might make this whole eclipse theory more than just a beautiful guess. You travel now across time, yes, but also geography. You're deep in Turkey now, in a dusty region known as Göbekli Tepe. It's not a cave, but an ancient temple, arguably the oldest known to humanity. Think Stonehenge, but 10,000 years older and way more mysterious. The pillars here aren't just massive, they're carved with animals, with shapes, with, yes, dots. And one carving in particular sends a shiver down your spine. It's of a scorpion detailed, stylized, centered on a massive stone, but around it a series of celestial-like symbols, and nearby another carved creature, one that looks suspiciously like a bull. Deja vu, right? Some researchers believe this entire temple was an early form of sky worship, a massive, open-air observatory. And according to one controversial study, one of the panels at Göbekli Tepe may depict the position of stars during a major astronomical event, possibly a comet impact. Or yes, even a solar eclipse. You crouch beside one of the massive T-shaped stones. It's smooth and cool under your palm. The scorpion, often associated with the Scorpius constellation, points toward another animal symbol that lines up with the ecliptic path. Sound familiar? It should. It's the same celestial road. The sun, moon, and planets travel a sky highway that determines, among other things, when eclipses happen. Here's the kicker: if these ancient builders were marking constellations and lining them up with known celestial events, it suggests a staggering level of sky literacy. Not just night sky admiration, but tracking, predicting, recording. Imagine 11,000 years ago, someone may have noticed, hey, when the moon gets here and the sun is there, something crazy happens. This isn't just guessing. This is early data analysis. In stone, of course. The mainstream isn't sold. Correlation is not causation. They warn, and fair. It's a slippery slope. From this looks like a star map to aliens built the pyramids. But remember, people laughed at the idea of Neanderthals having burial rituals too, until we found grave sites with flowers and red ochre. Historians still argue whether Göbekli Tepe's carvings are symbolic storytelling or structured astronomy. But either way, they speak, and the message they whisper isn't we're primitive, it's we're watching the sky. Just like you, your footfalls echo now as you move among the stone pillars. There's a rhythm to this place, as if it was meant to guide not just bodies, but eyes. You can't help it. You look up. The stars haven't changed. Not really. Oh, sure. The Earth wobbles a bit, called precession, but many constellations still grace the night sky now, just as they did then, and eclipses still just as awe-inducing. Here's a mainstream historical fact to anchor you: the Saros cycle, an 18-year rhythm of repeating eclipses, was formally recognized by the Babylonians around 600 BCE, but many suspect it was noticed far earlier. Why? Because it's hard to miss. If you track the moon long enough, you see it. And maybe, just maybe, the artists in Lascaux, the builders of Göbekli Tepe, did see it. Now let's zoom in again. You're no longer in Turkey. You're in Scotland, of all places, examining the Ballochmyle Cup and ring marks, some of the oldest outdoor carvings in the British Isles. They're not animals or people, just spirals, circles, dots. But if you chart the orientation of those carvings to the night sky, something strange happens. Some of the spirals line up with lunar standstills, those rare moments when the moon's rise and set positions reach their extremes, and when you account for latitude, time of year, and moon phase, one or two of them even match with known eclipse paths. It's not conclusive, not even close, but it adds to the pile of maybes. You step away from the stone, wind whipping around you. The landscape is different, but the questions echo. Why did they carve these dots? Why so many cultures, so far apart, drawing circles within circles? You squint at the horizon, imagining the moment when, once again, the moon moves across the sun. Silence, birds still, temperature drops. The light shifts into something surreal and shadowless. Even now, knowing the science, your heart jumps. Your body reacts before your brain does. You're afraid because something ancient inside you remembers. You don't want to look away, but you can't look directly either. So you do what your ancestors did. You draw. You scratch a symbol into a rock. You dot it like a star map. You try to make sense of a universe that gives you sunlight 1 second and a cosmic blackout the next. And deep in your bones, across 10,000 years of fear and awe, something whispers. This has happened before, and it will happen again, but not yet. It's night again, and you're back in your own bed, but your mind isn't ready to sleep. Not yet. The stars outside your window feel closer somehow, like they've been watching this whole time. You close your eyes and the cave walls return. The flickering torch, the scorpion, the dots, the whisper of wind through carved stone. You're not done yet. This time, you travel to Ireland, where the grass is always just a little too green and the skies are never quite clear. Tucked deep in the hills lies Newgrange, a massive Stone Age passage tomb, older than Stonehenge and the pyramids of Giza. But this isn't just some ancient burial site. No. Newgrange is a solar trap, a time machine, a stone-locked calendar. Here's the wild part. Every year, on the winter solstice, sunlight pierces through a narrow opening above the doorway and travels a long passage, illuminating the deep inner chamber for just a few minutes. That's it. That's the window. Miss it, and you wait another 365 days, give or take a leap year. You're standing there now, cold breath fogging the air. The crowd is silent. Then light. A golden beam snakes through the darkness, touching carvings that haven't seen the sun in a year. Spirals, triskel, concentric circles. It's like the stones are breathing again. And yes, you guessed it, dots. Some of the carvings, scattered across curbstones and internal walls, seem decorative at first, but you trace your fingers over them and feel a rhythm, a repetition, clusters of 29, groups of 12, enough to make your math teacher weep with joy. Could they be lunar cycles, solar tracking, or dare we say it, a predictive calendar for eclipses? Because here's what you now know to predict an eclipse. You need two things, time and alignment. You have to know when the moon will cross the sun's path and where. And while many people still think ancient humans just crossed their fingers and hoped the sky didn't eat the sun again, structures like Newgrange say otherwise. Let's toss in our required historical anchor, the Babylonians. Bless them. We're tracking eclipses by at least the 8th century BCE. They used clay tablets to chart Saros cycles, predicting both lunar and solar eclipses with remarkable accuracy. But who taught them? Who whispered the stars' secrets into their ear? Because here's the fringe twist for this section. Some scholars think that places like Newgrange, Lascaux, and Göbekli Tepe might have influenced or shared knowledge with later cultures via a prehistoric global network. Think of it like Stone Age Reddit, but with more ochre and fewer memes. It's a stretch, a bold one. Most mainstream historians raise a skeptical eyebrow and sip their tea, but they can't deny the similarities: spirals in Ireland, bull figures in France, celestial alignments in Turkey. Either humans were brilliant in parallel, or someone, somewhere, started connecting dots. You step outside the tomb now, squinting into the cloudy morning light. The air smells like peat smoke and wet grass. You walk toward the nearby Noth site, another Neolithic mound dotted with carvings. One stone shows a symbol that looks uncannily like a solar corona, those flaring rings we see only during total eclipses. It could be coincidence, or maybe not. Historians still argue whether these carvings represent actual eclipse observations or just general celestial reverence. But as you rub your fingers over the cold, grooved stone, you feel the same awe that painter in Lascaux must have felt, the same chill that shaman felt in the snow. And then you hear a sound, low, rhythmic, chanting. You're not alone anymore. You're now part of a solstice ritual, surrounded by cloaked figures, each holding a small carved token. Some wear antlers, others have faces painted with ash and berry dye. They're singing not words exactly, but tones. You feel it in your chest more than your ears. You're handed a stone, warm from another's hand. It's etched with a spiral. You don't know what it means, but you hold it tight anyway. And that's the heart of it, right? Not knowing, but feeling. These people may not have had calculus or Kepler's laws, but they had rhythm, repetition, patience, 10,000 sunsets, and 10,000 chances to notice that something weird happens when the sun and moon dance too close. You're pulled into the circle, the ritual continuing as the light fades. You can almost taste the smoke in the air, feel the thrum of centuries vibrating through your bones. You look up, the sky's gone dark again, and just like before, you don't run, you remember. You draw a spiral in the dirt. You whisper the count of days since the last eclipse. You try to hold on to this moment, because even if you don't understand it, you know it's important. And someday, someone might need to know what you saw. Back in your modern bed, you twitch slightly in your sleep. Outside, the moon passes through a cloud, casting a strange glow across the room. You don't wake up, but the dots, they're starting to connect. You wake up gasping, not in fear, but with a question burning your tongue. It's been crawling toward the surface ever since that golden solstice light crept into the Newgrange chamber. You throw off the covers, sit upright, and whisper to the empty room. But how did they know? And it's not just how, it's why. Why spend decades, maybe lifetimes, hauling stones the size of minivans to align with an event that happens once a year? Why carve spirals and bulls and scorpions if they're just doodles? Why? Across so many cultures and miles, is there always a common thread of light, dark, and return? You dig into your memory, and tonight, we're heading to Mesoamerica, specifically Teotihuacan, the ancient city near modern-day Mexico City. And there, Standing proud against the sky is the Pyramid of the Sun. Now, this thing is massive, bigger than the Great Pyramid at Giza in terms of volume. And it's not just for show, it's placed, angled, and built to track celestial events. Archaeologists have found that its orientation lines up with the setting sun on particular days, possibly marking agricultural or religious dates. But here's the weird part. Some of the murals and relics found in the city, like jaguars with burning eyes or snakes devouring suns, could be mythologized records of solar eclipses. One depiction shows a celestial body being swallowed, then spit out sound familiar. A mainstream historical nugget, the Maya, not far from Teotihuacan, had a ridiculously advanced calendar system. They could predict solar eclipses centuries into the future. And this wasn't accidental. They used codices, observational towers, and complex math based on base 20 and base 18 systems. If you've ever tried to divide by 18 in your head, you know that alone deserves a Nobel. Now, scholars debate whether Teotihuacan directly influenced the Maya, or if both cultures independently figured things out. But once again, we return to the same puzzle somehow. Someone noticed a pattern and carved it into stone. The same sun, the same moon, the same moment of darkness that sends birds diving and humans to their knees. And you want quirky? Here's one in some Mesoamerican myths. Eclipses were blamed on celestial jaguars biting the moon, or on sun gods getting grumpy and hiding behind clouds in protest. But these weren't just bedtime stories. These myths shaped entire city-building projects. They planned their cities to respond to the sky-mirroring constellations, shadows, and solstice events. And that jaguar, probably a metaphor for what they couldn't quite explain, but could still measure. You walk through the ruins now. The Pyramid of the Sun towers over you, casting a shadow so massive it feels like time itself is hiding behind it. You pass through the Avenue of the Dead, where once parades of priests in feathered cloaks chanted beneath lunar alignments, one foot in ritual, the other in science. The air is dry. The earth smells like dust and lime. You sit at the base of a pyramid, tracing the stone with your fingers, when you notice again dots, small carvings, sometimes missed by tourists. Some are single, some in threes, some in sequences that match lunar cycles. Historians still argue whether these were records, predictions, or offerings, but the odds of so many repeating across cultures and landscapes are shrinking, and your skeptical mind is starting to get quieter. Back in your own hemisphere, another connection calls. You head now to Cahokia, near present-day St. Louis. Once, it was one of the largest cities in North America. Built by the Mississippian culture, it had towering mounds and woodhenge-like structures designed to track solstices and possibly eclipses. There's a site called Woodhenge, a circle of wooden posts that align with the solstice sunrises and sunsets. Sound familiar? Yes, because Stonehenge in England does the same. Thousands of miles apart, similar concept. You walk among the reconstructed poles, birds flitting through the air, and you try to picture the original ceremony. The drums, the silence, the watchers with eyes lifted toward a sky that's about to vanish. A solar eclipse over Cahokia would have sent shadows racing across the flatlands. You picture cornfields plunged into cold, Midday darkness, children screaming, priests chanting, and when the light returns, celebration, relief, a story etched into memory, or maybe into the walls of a mound. And now you're seeing it. Right, the same story again and again. From France to Turkey, Ireland to Mexico, Scotland to Missouri. The same flicker of sunlight vanishing behind a black disk. The same response, awe, fear, and eventually mark-making. The same dots. And here's the real kicker. We've used modern astronomy software to retroactively simulate solar eclipses across millennia. Some line up shockingly well with the dates these sites were active. It doesn't prove intent, but it suggests knowledge. And where there's knowledge, there's memory. You lie back in the grass outside Woodhenge now, hands behind your head, and stare up at the sky. The stars slowly emerge. A shooting star zips past. Somewhere, a coyote howls. You don't need a telescope tonight. Just your eyes, just your breath, and maybe a rock and something to carve with. Because when that next eclipse comes, you'll want to remember. And 10,000 years from now, someone just like you might find what you left behind. You wake up slower this time. It's not a jolt. More like your brain rises through layers of starlight and quiet until your eyelids flutter. And you're back in the room, back in this century. But something's different. There's a whisper under your ribs, a thread you've been pulling all night. And now it's almost unraveled, because by now, you know ancient people didn't stumble through darkness blindly. They watched, they waited, and sometimes they even predicted. So tonight, your dream drifts east into India, where centuries of night sky poetry and precise math blend like tea and monsoon wind. You walk barefoot through an ancient observatory, Jantar Mantar, built in the 18th century, but resting on concepts thousands of years older. It looks like a playground for time giant stone staircases, half circles, and wedges all angled just so. This place isn't hiding anything, it's showing off. Each structure calculates celestial event solstices, equinoxes, planetary motions, and while it came long after cave art, the thinking behind it reaches deep into Vedic astronomy, which suggested a heliocentric model and lunar eclipse cycles well before telescopes existed. Here's a tasty historical fact. Indian scholars like Aryabhata in the 5th century CE correctly explained eclipses as shadow events, not monsters or gods. And they even calculated the diameter of the moon using nothing but geometry and careful observation. He probably didn't own a lab coat, just a sharp stick and a love for looking up. And now for the twist. Despite all this mathematical precision, India still held fast to celestial mythology. Eclipses weren't just calculated, they were felt. The demon Rahu, who swallowed the sun or moon in cosmic revenge, was still part of the story. Science and myth didn't cancel each other out. They coexisted, like left brain and right brain sharing tea. You wander deeper into the city, incense wafting through the air. You smell sandalwood and burnt ghee. Street vendors whisper over pots of chai. Somewhere, bells ring deep and rhythmic. And in a small temple courtyard, you find a weathered carving, a serpent coiled around a disc, fangs bared, eyes furious. You know what it is. You look closer, and they're dots. Not many, just a crescent cluster along the serpent's spine, almost hidden in the stone's grain. But they're there. Could be scars, could be records, could be Rahu's calendar. Historians still argue whether those dots are symbolic or scientific, whether ancient Indian eclipse myths were rooted in astronomy or simply layered over it. But you know better now. It's never either or. It's yes. And next stop, the Islamic Golden Age around 900 to 1300 CE. Now you're gliding over Baghdad, Cairo, Cordoba. The call to prayer echoes as you drift into a domed observatory, where scholars in long robes scribble on parchment under oil lamps. These folks, they're the ones who took Greek, Indian, and Babylonian knowledge and turned it into an astronomical superblend. They charted lunar cycles, calculated the tilt of the Earth, and yes, predicted eclipses with staggering precision. They used astrolabes, complex instruments like medieval Swiss army knives for the sky. Quirky bit? Some of those astrolabes included tiny plates just for eclipse predictions, like a solar panic button in your pocket. Imagine pulling one out mid-apocalypse and calmly saying, "Yes, don't worry, this ends at 3:46. You turn one of these ancient instruments over in your hands. It's brass, cool to the touch. There's a small inscription along the edge in Arabic. It reads, "He who watches the heavens watches his own soul." You walk through the corridors of time, passing philosophers, mathematicians, poets. You hear their questions bounce off the stone. What moves the stars? What hides the sun? Can truth be measured in shadow? And then you land in modern times. You're standing inside NASA headquarters now. Computers hum, scientists murmur in clipped urgency. A screen shows Earth from space, the moon's shadow sweeping like a dark hand across the globe. Solar eclipses are no longer mysteries. They're graphed, tweeted, live streamed, but here's the kicker. They're still magical, because even now, with all our satellites and apps, people still gather in fields and deserts and on rooftops to watch the sky disappear. We still gasp. We still cry. We still feel the hairs on our arms rise when the birds go quiet and the world turns silver. And guess what? We still draw dots. A total eclipse chart looks suspiciously like a cave wall, sometimes circles, lines, positions marked in clusters. Some scientists even reenact the Saros cycle, a method first traced by Babylonians, echoing in Indian and Greek texts, refined in Arabic manuscripts, and now encoded into software. You rub your eyes. You've seen enough to know now this wasn't coincidence. The bull wasn't just dinner. The dots weren't just decoration. The people in those caves were looking up, just like you, and they wanted to remember, because losing the sun is terrifying, unless you expect it, unless you've seen it before, unless you have the count. You walk outside. It's quiet. No traffic, no voices, just your breath and the sky above. And for one moment, the moon glides across the sun again, just in your imagination. You feel the hush. You feel time stretch. You remember everything, not with a telescope, with a rock and a memory. The eclipse ends, but you still carry the shadow. The room is quiet now. You don't open your eyes yet. You let the darkness settle around you, like the tail end of an eclipse, cool, quiet, sacred. You can feel something near the end, like the final frame of a film. You're not quite ready to stop watching. So you let your mind drift one last time, back to the place where it all began, back to the cave. You're standing once more in that curved chamber in Lascaux, your fingers brushing against the damp stone. The air smells of earth and moss, and the torchlight flickers, casting shadows that dance like old ghosts. And there are the animals, the bull, the bird, the scorpion, and yes, the 7 stars hovering nearby. Dots, not random, but purposeful, arranged in such a way that modern astronomy raised a very serious eyebrow. The theory still floats in the air that this artwork so old, so delicate, might have been the earliest known record of a solar eclipse. It's not confirmed. Scholars still argue whether the alignment of the animals mimics constellations, whether the dot patterns correspond to eclipse paths or meteor showers, or if they're just decorative. But the more you've traveled tonight, the more you've come to suspect that sometimes the oldest truths wear the simplest masks. Let's rewind. You've walked through tombs built for light, through pyramids whispering sun chants, through hinges of wood and stone aligned to solstice. You've stepped into temples where jaguars eat the sun and demons swallow the moon. You've held brass astrolabes in candlelight and touched the ribs of wooden observatories beneath the Missouri sky. You've seen science braided with myth, fear woven into architecture, and hope etched into rock. And above all, you've seen how one blinding moment, a stolen sun, can echo through every culture, every century, every continent. That moment when the world doesn't make sense, and then suddenly it does, because someone had the nerve to look up, watch it happen, and leave a mark for you. Let's hit one last historical note before we close the book. There's a theory, quiet, fringe, poetic, that human consciousness shifted when we began to track the sky. That once we started noticing patterns above us, we began to notice patterns inside us, the rhythms of the moon, the cycles of light and dark, and that the act of carving dots on a cave wall wasn't just astronomy, it was identity. We became ourselves the moment we mapped the heavens. And maybe that's why this story stays with you, because every time someone marks an eclipse on stone, papyrus, parchment, paper, or app, they're whispering, I was here, I saw the shadow, and I knew it would pass. One last quirky detail to carry into sleep. There's a stone in Turkey that might show a solar eclipse from 13,000 years ago. A carved disc found at Göbekli Tepe with a lion, a vulture, and what some claim is an alignment of celestial symbols. Some scientists dismiss it. Others insist it proves proto-writing, an emotional response to a moment the sun disappeared. You don't need to know for sure. It's enough to feel it, because whether it was a Paleolithic hunter staring up at a dimming sky, a Maya priest watching the sun vanish behind a serpent's tail, or a scientist in a hoodie live streaming an eclipse on YouTube, they were all chasing the same thing, understanding. And now, so are you. You lie back in your bed. The story winds down. The sky outside your window is dark and quiet, maybe a little cloudy, maybe perfectly clear, but tonight it doesn't matter, because now, even in shadow, you understand the light. The dots aren't just dots anymore. They're a message, a timeline, a trail left by people just like you who faced the same sky and wanted to make sure no one ever forgot it. And now, neither will you. You feel your breath slowing now. The story has gently pulled away, like the moon easing off the face of the sun. You're warm under your blanket, the room still, your heartbeat soft. Outside, the world turns steadily, the stars wheeling above you in quiet motion, whether you're watching or not. You trace the journey once more in your mind cave walls, lit by flame, giant stone suns resting on green hills, lost cities bathed in dusk, and mathematicians with inkwells and silent questions. All of them stared into the heavens and came away changed. And now, you've done the same. In your own way, there's something soothing about knowing you're part of this continuum. That even now, in your small corner of the world, you're part of a legacy that spans continents and centuries, a shared awe, a common thread, from bull-shaped constellations to pixelated charts, from sacred fires to fiber optic cables. It all leads back to that moment of darkness and light returning. Let that thought cradle you now. Let your eyes drift closed. Let your mind wander gently, without pressure or pace, back into that ancient night where someone made the first mark, not for fame or fear, but simply to remember, because remembering makes it real. And now, you remember too, the story is over. See you tomorrow night. Sweet dreams.